Good strategic framework provides clarity around what is important, priorities. And several of you mentioned priorities. A strategy helps you prioritize. And then, someone else picked up.
Can't see it, it's not visible.
It's not visible?
It seems a bit blurred.
Let me see from the back.
Okay. You will be getting all the slides in the end.
It's blur.
It's fine for me, but we're turning off this light.
I think it's the same.
And you can continue as this.
I can continue? Okay, so as some of you also mentioned, it insists on focus and alignment of effort, including how to say no. Because if you keep on saying yes to what everybody demands of you, you will not be able to deliver on it. And saying no is really hard. A strategy helps you do that. It ensures commitment to shared goals. When you all understand the goals, you can all work together to achieve them. An organisation with a strategy that the staff believe in is an organisation that is committed, an organisation that is motivated, and as leaders, you need to make sure the strategy lives in their eyes. It doesn't sit on a shelf, guys. So many of you talked about strengths and weaknesses. So a strategy helps you identify how you're going to improve. So often we talk about a strategy as being an external facing thing, what we're going to do for our customers, our clients, and so forth. But a strategy also has to tell you what you're going to do for yourselves. Which is why when we talk about the pillars, we're going to talk about the external pillars, but also the internal pillar. Because the internal pillar is part of what we say, how to win. What do we have to be excellent at ourselves to be able to deliver to our clients, our customers, our members? Someone also picked up that it is a basis for resource allocation. If your budget is not predicated upon your strategy, then you have a big problem. And your strategy is what drives your budget. Now you might find that as a result, that you don't have enough resources. The strategy helps you cut your cloth according to your resources. Larger organizations have a framework. They have a structure. So a strategy helps you develop that structure.
Then?
But also, and Andrea mentioned this much earlier, there's a third course. It's on measurement and performance. It's really hard to measure something if you don't know what you're measuring and why you're measuring and what it's supposed to be telling you. So to be able to measure well, you need to have a strategy. And when we see each other again, I hope very much, later this year, we will work together as how do you use your strategy to create a measurement framework that's meaningful. It's actually going to show that you're creating progress. But also a strategy allows the basis for communication. Because when you have a strategy, you have a direction and you can discuss that, and you discuss it with confidence, and people understand that. So I think you all did a really good job picking up on those things, right? So give yourselves a round of applause. Good job. Okay. So.
Done. It's there.
You did. Your magic. Look at you.
I have the baguette.
Okay. Thank you. Right. So it's a set of principles and rules that guides your actions. It involves a view from above. We call it the helicopter view. Now, I was really lucky early in my career to be sent on an incredible strategy course. And it was in the most beautiful place. And one of the first things they did was they took us up in helicopters so we could look below and we could understand the context of what we were looking at. Because when you're on the ground, you just see what's around you, but you're not understanding it. When you look above, you're looking down, you can see, I can see how these things fit together. I can see what the landscape's like. A strategy allows you to do that. The work that you do in developing your strategy gives you that view from above. Remember, always look up and down. It gives longer term outcomes, your goals. It helps you manage uncertainty. And Andrea and I will talk a few times about this thing called REACT. And it's about how does an organization cope with crisis? How does an organization cope with stress? And uncertainty is one of those things. This world is, there's a lot of vulnerability, a lot of uncertainty in this world. There's things going on that we don't know about. A strategy provides like a stick in the ground to say, hey, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing. And it guides the tactical decisions. So the strategy is where you're going, tactical is how you get there. Andrea. So we have seen a lot of organizations that have no strategy, or organizations that have a poorly written strategy, or an out-of-date strategy, or a strategy that was written for them and is meaningless. And this is what we see. The organization feels stuck, it's not going anywhere, they just keep doing the same thing, the same way for the same results, except they're not really results. So you're not making an impact. Your strategy is there for you to make an impact. You're making an impact for the farmers, the businesses, the entrepreneurs, whoever it is that you're working for, your members. You want them to make an impact. And for them to make an impact, you have to make an impact. Do you agree with me?
Yes.
Right. But you won't even know if you're making an impact if you haven't got a strategy and it's not telling you what to measure. Everything connects. If you don't have a strategy, you don't know where you're going to be in 2 to 3 years, let alone 5. So again, you're working and reacting as opposed to being proactive. Your staff are confused. Organizations without good strategy, with staff are just coming, just showing up to do their job and eat their lunch, they're not motivated, they're not thinking forward. The energy is low. Morale is low. I've been in an organization with poor energy and poor morale, and it's not much fun. I have been in some organizations, terrific energy, fantastic morale, and you come to work every day thinking, oh, what's my next challenge? What's going to excite us today? What are we going to achieve? A strategy says, it doesn't give you a way to say no. Saying no is important. I once worked, I was working in the New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. We had a Minister of Government who wanted us to support the investment of a chocolate factory. But that wasn't in our strategy. In fact, we were not even working in that area. And the Minister saying, no, I'm going to do it in this city, it's going to come, I've got all the things organised. He said, we're not going to support it. This is the government minister. My job is to work with government. And we just said, no, I'm sorry. You have our strategy. You approved our strategy, Minister. Here's your signature. You saw everything. Where does it say foodstuffs in this sector? But I want it. I said, but no. And we could, because the law allowed us to use our strategy to say to the minister, if we put money in this, we are taking money away from the things that we said we would deliver for you. So if you want us to do this, you tell us, Minister, what you don't want us to do. You know, it wasn't an easy conversation, but I wasn't scared. I had a strategy. Yeah, I was a little bit scared, I was. A little bit scared. But if you don't have when you're reactive, you'll be saying, yes, Minister. And then you say, what am I not going to do now? So you have control of a strategy. The competition might be doing things that you haven't even thought about, because as part of your strategy, you're thinking about the future. And we're going to give you some tools in these next few days about how do you look at the future at the same time as you look at the present and the medium term. And that's a valuable tool, let me tell you. You don't understand the risks. You don't understand the trends. You are always on your back foot. Always. You don't have any contingencies to understand and take on the risks. Because the strategy of everything else is about risk. Understanding the risks and deciding which ones you're prepared to take. Which means your financial performance is not so good. And I don't think any of you have turned up here to go away thinking, I'm not going to be much better than I was. You've all turned up here to say, how can I unlock something that I know exists, right? Strategy helps you unlock. Okay. Yes, I love questions, please.
One thing, okay, you have got something is unforeseen error you called. Something is not in your control, something behind the control.
Yes.
Since morning, I not seen anyone one slide. Is it also a part of the strategy? We can also include that unforeseen error, like we have strategy for a crop, suppose.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good crop, then at once the climate is changed. So all the strategy is going to fail.
Yes.
So now what we will do in this aspect?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and a question that's relevant for you in Pakistan, because I know that you've had some disasters. But you know, I was in New Zealand in January and February, and we had floods too. We have lost an entire province. It's just set up to the ocean, and that was one of the main food producing provinces, main wine producing provinces. So I understand your question. In the strategy, you do a risk assessment, and you need to be sure that you have, as an organisation, the what we call the core muscles to be able to withstand shocks. Now, you cannot predict a mass flood. You cannot predict an earthquake. We have earthquakes too. You can't predict these things. But what you can do is to understand how can you be the best that you can be to support your members and so forth. And we talk about react, which is being ready, knowing that, if something happens, that you are ready to swing into action and just to be there. Expert, good at what you do, knowing what you do. You need to be able to take action. You need to be ready to understand what people need, connected, know how to connect different parts of the business community, to be able to provide advice to government. And this is where you start changing your movement. So you might be working in a particular area and your strategy says, okay, we're going to do this. You're going to have to change your targets. You're going to have to change your goals, and you're going to have to change your time frame. You can do these things because it's your strategy. But what you don't change is what's important, that the main thing is the main thing. So if you cannot be producing that crop in that area at that time, then your strategy is how do we support these farmers? First of all, in the immediacy of the emergency, and then how do we work with them to plan our way through, our way out? And that might be replanting the crops, but it might be actually changing the crops or changing where you crop. And I don't understand the exigencies here, but this is what we are doing right now, is how do we, well, it's too early, actually. We don't even know if we can replant. We don't even know if the whole province can be reconstituted. We might have to make it a red zone and no one can live there. But if you are clear about what you're trying to do, clear about what your overall objective is, the thing that you want to do is to make your businesses, your farmers, more successful and improve their lifestyle, you have to change the time frame and the target in terms of how many you're going to get by when. But the overall objective of your strategy remains the same. We're going to be there, we're going to help them, we're going to help them get there. As an institution, you have to be adaptable and flexible underneath. The strategy still sits there. COVID, I'm going to take your questions in just a second. COVID, we all had to change our strategy for COVID. Except we all were still trying to do the same thing, but we were doing them differently, with different people, in different ways, and in different time frames. And the achievement of the objectives was going to be different. And I think that adaptability is really fine. It's really fine. But there are some things you cannot predict. So what you have to be is expert, and you have to be there. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. You have a question?
Yeah, I just also want to respond to Farooq Khalid Saab. In fact, when you prepare the strategy, it also helps you prepare the SWOT analysis. Strategy also helps you scale the environment. It also helps you to prepare DRR, DRMs. So it can be changed in terms of any disasters, natural disaster, it can be man-made disasters. So you can change your strategies there. Basically, strategy is the first step to prepare for all the good and bads.
Yes, but the thing is, natural disasters, I think, it's changed in the last few years. I think before we did not plan as well. You'd have a business continuity plan, you'd know what to do, but you wouldn't expect the disasters. So in the last decade, we've had 2 major earthquakes, and in the last month, we've had 2 major flooding events. So that's, these would be once in 20-year events of that. So now as we're making strategies, we've got to think about them as being not a risk, but something that is very likely to happen. So you have to start changing your strategy using the scans, but you learn from history, you learn from what's happened, and you need to see what's happening next. It's not easy. Good questions.
I think that if you have a comprehensive strategy in which you have already mentioned that many parts of the disaster situation, it would be the part of the contingency plan, and many other things are also the part of. So I think this depend on what kind of the comprehensive strategy you have. If you have, in which it means you have already focused many aspects in coming in the future also, because you are very much familiar about the monsoon season and the disaster and many other things also. So some things are happening, some things are not. That's why I'm talking about the external forces as well as the internal forces. Both are considered in the strategic plan.
They are, and that's when you do you SWOT and the environmental scans, all of they will have, but there's always going to be something that you have not been prepared for. But yeah, I do. Okay.
Good.
Yes.
Next. I think also that we're going to discuss the strategic planning horizons later. So we're going to discuss this and the risk elements that we're going to discuss. I think that what we all agree, if I can just to respond to all your concerns, because obviously risk is something that became very, very present into what we do. Is the fact that one thing that no one can context is the fact that we need strong muscles. I mean, the more the organization is in good shape at the moment where the risk events materialize, the more resilient is organization to actually to adapt to the change that this risk brings along. Okay. So now we're going to have a street exercise. We're going to have the balance of how you implement the strategy within your organization, and we're going to have an exercise with this Oreo thing. So I'm gonna let Penny to conduct this exercise.
Okay, so don't eat the biscuit. Okay, don't eat the biscuit yet. Okay?
We want to make it sure it looks like this.
It's going to look like that. But here they come. Direct from the supermarket in France. Yeah. So I want you to take an Oreo cookie each. And when you get the cookie, you're not going to eat it. But I want you to look at it. And I want you to think about a characteristic about it.
I got this activities after the tea break.
Yeah. No, you see, I can't trust you people before tea break. We need to make sure your tummies are full. Okay, so when you get your cookie, just look at it and have a think about it. What do you know about Oreos? What's interesting about it? Don't eat the red.
Just look in the picture and look at the
Life is disappointment. Life is disappointment. It's never going to look as good as the advertising.
But in Japan, they say what?
It's true, right? Japan is very good. However, we're not in Japan. This is a French Oreo. France is nothing but this. Honestly. Everyone needs an Oreo. Everybody needs an Oreo. Come on. This is a team exercise. Who has that? You don't have to eat it. Okay, has everyone got one?
Yeah.
Who has not got an Oreo cookie? Okay, pick up your cookie. Look at the Oreo cookie. Tell me some things about this cookie. Even the most basic thing. Tell me something about it. Just shout it out.
It's round.
It's round.
I noticed a bit why. I don't know why. Why? Letter Y?
Is it in a Y? I don't know. Oh, is it a Ricardo? Yes.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
This is the very first time I'm noticing this.
Oh,
Yeah.
yep. Very good detail on the Oreo. More.
It's twin.
It's twins. Oh, that's so cute. It is. It's twins. It's two cookies.
It's a sandwich.
It's a sandwich.
Yeah.
It's two round cookies, two of them in a sandwich. Yes.
It is beautifully embroidered.
It shows it's very tempting and hard to resist.
Tempting and hard to resist.
It is
The
embroidered.
cream is white in color.
The cream is
They have-
white.
They have the pink one as well. This
They're
one-
pink ones. They're horrible.
Yeah.
Don't eat the pink ones.
Okay.
Oh, team strawberries. Awful. I once did a course of strawberry Oreos and it was like, oh.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
It's broken but crispy.
It's broken. It's traveled from France. Forgive it. Forgive me. Okay. What else?
Here is one thing which is connecting two things.
Oh. Yeah, he's being clever. One thing connecting two things. What else? It's cream. Colored. Sort of black, dark brown. We hope it's because of chocolate. We're not sure. What else?
It's a design, a tattoo design.
It's got something imprinted on it.
Yeah, tattoo.
Yes.
That's what I said.
Oreo is written.
Oreo is written. Oreo is written. It tells you what it is. You didn't know it was an Oreo?
It smells good.
It smells good. Don't eat it.
And it is a treat. It is a treat from France for us.
Yeah. I don't know if it's made in France, but we can say this. Okay. Anything else?
Empowerment, strengthening each other. Empowerment.
Oh, this table's just trying to be too clever.
It's a product.
It is a product, yes. Hey, did you know
They also impose their identity.
it has an identity? It's stamped on it. It knows who it is. Did you know?
Cream can eat separately.
Wow, that's a very interesting point. We're coming to that. Did you know that Oreos are vegan?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, they're vegan, which is unimportant to this discussion, but I think it's interesting.
Yes.
Because sometimes you do this and people, oh, I'm vegetarian, I'm not touching that. No, you can. And it might have every other chemical known on the planet, but it is at least vegan. Okay, so, good observation about the Oreos. Let me tell you why we use the Oreo cookie, and it's about an equation that's relevant to strategy. Are you doing the Liz? Okay. So those of you who looked at the construction, it was a sandwich, two crispy outsides and a creamy middle, right? The Oreo represents what we call tight, loose, tight. This construction of the Oreo represents a good organization. Let me explain. The top of the Oreo is about purpose, behavior, and strategy. If you have an organization that understands what it is for, where it is going, how they want people to behave, that is an organization that has clarity. That is an organization that has a strong outer shell. If the organization also has good measurement, good reporting, good controls, good processes, good audit, So you know where you're going, you know what's important, you know how to behave, you know why you're there, but then you also know, are you going to get there? How are you going to get there? Because you have the strength underneath. You see, you have the hard shell at the top, the hard shell at the bottom. That makes a strong sandwich, right? But a sandwich isn't a sandwich if it has something in the middle. And what's in the middle? Gooey cream. But gooey cream is really important because that's how you empower your people. If they know why they're there, if they know how they're assessed, if they know what behaviour they have to do, if they know how they're going to be checked, their performance reviews, if they understand their strategy, they understand why it's important that they show it's delivered, they have the ability to make good decisions. They have the ability to decide for themselves because they understand the parameters. What you want is to enable your people. You employ staff. You employ them because you choose them because of their skills and their knowledge. And you want them to deliver on what you want to deliver. And I'm going to give you an example. So I was in Barbados, and I bought a handbag at a shop which ironically belonged to the chairman of the board, which I found out later, which is quite a funny discussion later. And I bought a handbag and I took it back to my hotel and it was broken. The catch was broken. So I had to take time out of my next day to take it back saying, this handbag is broken, I would like a refund. And the sales assistant said, but I can't give you a refund. I said, I have to have a refund, I can't use the handbag. He said, no, I'll take the handbag from you and I will send it to the manufacturer in Italy or somewhere, and then I have to wait for them to assess the damage to see whether you caused it, or if there's something else they can fix. And if they can fix it, we'll get it fixed, we'll send it back here. If they can't fix it, we'll replace it. I said, look, I don't live here. I'm leaving the country in 3 days. There's no chance for you to send it to whoever it was. I just want a refund, and I'll buy another bag. No, I can't do that. It's like, well, I'm sorry, you put me in a really hard situation because you've told me something that's not valuable. And I was very angry about it. So I said, what are you going to do to help me? Can I speak to your manager? This is process, this is our process, this is how we do things. I said, this doesn't work. You're a tourist country, someone's bought something that's not good, the process doesn't work for you tourists. Not only am I very unhappy, I'm going to make sure that everybody else knows how unhappy I am and how your process doesn't work. She said, this was our process, I can't change it. So I was unhappy. I had a handbag I couldn't use. And the thing is, why did she have to do that? Why did she have to say, no, you can't have the refund? I can see that you're not going to be here. I'll sort it out. Let me give you a refund or buy another bag, that's fine. But she wouldn't even entertain it because the rules of the organisation said, no, this is how you do it. If she was empowered to say at the shop saying, you know, we want to sell things, we want to make our customers happy, we want you to use your decisions, we will check whether the handbag was broken, we will check whether you gave her the right refund, then she could have said, of course, madam, let me give you a refund straight away. And I wouldn't have been cross. But I was cross, and then the next day I found out that the manager of the shop, the owner of the shop chain, was the chairman of the board of the organisation I was working with. It was a very interesting conversation I had. I got the money, but I also gave him the Oreo, and I said, hey, look at this. And he was like, you know what? I see the point. I see the point. Do you see the point? Do you see the point of why you can have cream if you have the outsides? It's what we call tight, loose, tight. Okay? So this has become sort of a thinking that we have about organisations. If they know where they're going, they know how they're going to be measured, they allow people to make the right decisions, which makes them more adaptable, more manoeuvrable, and make choices that make the difference for who they're working for. And if you look at the other, how else could you have an Oreo? Well, if you had nothing but cream, the loose bit in the middle, what have you got? You've got a high-risk organisation, there's no direction, no one knows what they're doing, everyone's having a really nice time, but for no purpose, really. If you have one that's on the outside, cream on the outside, it's really hard to eat, isn't it? It's sticky, it doesn't make sense, you can't package it. It also means it's high risk, they're not really thinking about where they're going, but they've got a lot of rules about how you have to behave. Or you can have one that's, every other construction doesn't quite work, does it? Now there's one instance where you might want to go hard in the middle. And that is if you're having to put in place really difficult change. Really difficult change where you have to actually start controlling people's behaviours to understand the change that you make before you can put the gooiness back in. So when we talk about this, the two sides, the top and the bottom, of what we call the core muscles, Andrea and I have talked about before, having those things allows you to have flexibility where it matters. The flexibility to adjust your strategy, to change your course, to allow people to behave the way that makes them the best that they can be. So it's motivating too. Okay, thank you. So, we're going to do the top part of the cookie today. We're going to talk about purpose, behaviour and strategy. And when we come back later in the year, we're going to do the bottom part, the measurement, how you understand performance. The middle part, that's up to you. It's up to how you want to empower your staff, how you want them to think. Does this resonate with any of you as a way to think about an organisation? Or do you just want to eat your Oreo?
Just want to eat the Oreo.
Then eat the Oreo!
No, we eat the Oreo.
Eat the Oreo. Eat the Oreo. Okay. So are we going to change the groups around now? Yep.
I think they are already mixed.
Right?
कोई ऐसा टेबल है जिसमें सिर्फ सिंध के बैठे हैं या सिर्फ बलूचिस्तान के, हम चाहते हैं कि थोड़ा मिक्स हो जाए, भाईचारगी बहनचारगी हो जाए, तो यहाँ पे मिक्स है, यहाँ पे भी मिक्स है,
But we're not even in numbers.
मैडम आपने एक इधर अंदर भी So I also want to make a gender balance.
Yes.
Let's make an effort. Let's mix, because now we're gonna have an exercise. So we have 28 participants in the room. So we need to have a groups that are even. So maybe 6 at each table. So we gonna move someone from.
We have many tables, so 5.
Five or six. Yeah,
And one of you that is maybe here with
And one
the
here,
gentleman,
because
and one here, and someone here maybe. We have someone. Please be collaborative. Let's move. Let's.
हाँ हमने रिक्वेस्ट की है
Can one of you join this group?
I already called.
Are we mixed enough now?
Just 2 minutes.
2 minutes more? We still don't have good gender mix.
We want one of these ladies.
Who's the greatest lady here?
Yes.
And does every table have at least 2 sets of these cards? Excellent, excellent. Okay, so now we're getting into the meat of our training. So, I've just spent a long time this morning mixing up those sets to make it hard for you, because, come on. But, are we ready? So, what does strategy need? It needs consultation, right? You've got to talk to people. Hold on, we just need everyone's attention. Don't start. Are you starting? No. No, we're going to start in a minute. Strategy needs consultation. It needs hard questions. You need to have good questions. It needs time and space to think differently. If you're trying to do the strategy while you're doing everything else, you will struggle to have a strategy. How many of you think you need to go on a retreat to make a strategy? Yeah. It seems to be just an excuse to have too much to eat, I think. You don't need to go on a retreat, but you need to make space, mental space. So you need to do the strategy when you're together in a mood to collaborate and people are not distracted. So you need to make time to do the strategy. If you can afford to do a retreat, lucky you. But you don't have to have it. Because I have had organizations say, oh, well, we really want to do our strategy. It's 2 years out of date, but we can't afford a retreat. Yes?
What I think is what I've experienced. What I've experienced is that if you're making, I do agree with you, it's not necessary to go on a retreat, but if you're working in the same environment and with the same people, you have a lot of disturbance and your mind cannot think out of the box also.
Yeah.
Because if I'm working in my office on a daily basis, even if we sit in a conference room, and under that pressure, under the same environment and everything, you're unable to think differently.
No,
So for that, you need to be displaced from your own comfort zone, and then you don't need any sort of disturbance. Because if, for example, if I'm here, I'm out of my location, everything, so my mind will think differently, but still I'm getting calls and disturbances, it will not affect me. So I need to totally disconnect with the same environment I'm living in.
I agree. I mean, that is time and space. But if you cannot, even if you just go to a local cafe or into someone's living room, you're right. A change of place is fine, but it doesn't have to be expensive. You don't have to.
Yeah, I
rent a
totally agree.
hotel,
It's not
yeah?
expensive, but at least
Agreed.
you have to be out.
And you need to put down everything else. You need to create the space. It's got to be deliberate. And a lot of people think they have to have someone doing the strategy for them. I think it's good. It's fine to have a facilitator, someone who's not from your organization to talk you through it. But they're not the ones designing the strategy. They're just pulling out the ideas and asking hard questions.
But don't you think that we need a consultant to facilitate that exercise?
Facilitate the exercises, yes. That's me asking the questions.
But ultimately,
You do the work. You do the work. I'm sorry to tell you that, but you have to do the work. It needs courage, actually. It needs ambition. You do have to separate yourself from your day-to-day. You have to say, no, that doesn't matter. My cell phone is not with me, or someone's holding on the cell phone in case something urgent happens, but you need that space. You need courage. You need to think further out. You need to be ambitious with strategy. If your strategy is not ambitious, why have one? You also need to know your customers. You need to have empathy with your customers. These are the things that you need to have a good strategy. And what does a good strategy do? It does these 4 I's. It keeps people interested. It keeps people informed. It keeps them involved. It makes them inspired. If your strategy doesn't answer those 4 I's, think about, is it the right strategy? Is it time to do something different with it? It means walking in the shoes of your customers, your shareholders, your stakeholders, and your staff. When you're doing the strategy, you are not you. You are a much bigger person, much wider perspective. So, it must answer 4 questions. Where are we now? This is about the context, your current position. People have talked about doing a SWOT analysis, understanding their strengths and weaknesses. So we have an exercise, so how do we look at where we are now? Then it asks, where do we want to be? What are we looking at in the future? What do we want to, I want to get there. How do you get there? What's putting you there? What's interesting for you there? What's your vision? What matters? What is the important thing? How do we get there? Where do we work? What sectors? What markets? Who do we work with? How do we decide these things? How are we going to get there? It's okay to have your context and to know where you're going, but you need to have a route, you need to have a map. You need to open up Google Maps and put an A and B and say, oh, which is the best route? Which route matters to me? What do I need to think about? What's the technology? What competencies do you have to have? What do you want the organisation to feel like for people in it? Now, have you heard the saying, strategy, it's a culture eats strategy for breakfast?
Yes.
Yeah. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you haven't got the culture to deliver it, people aren't motivated, they don't believe that you believe it, you'll never get there. Culture is really important. And then how do we know when we have arrived? And I think this is some area that some strategies really failed in because they're not thinking about, gosh, they're so intent on the journey. We haven't looked at the milepost, at the signpost. We haven't looked at where we're past. We haven't tracked where we've been. Where you've been will tell you how you're going. If you make a wrong turn, you need to know when that wrong turn was. How do you do that? By measuring performance, by using indicators to understand that. You need to understand where you've been. You need to understand how you're tracking. You need to know, do you need to put your foot on the accelerator? Do you need to drive more carefully? Are the instruments telling you what you need to know? You set the instruments by setting the measures. So those are the 4 areas that you need to think about for your strategy. So just think about these for a second, because they are going to help you in the next exercise. So, a strategy must be feasible. It's got to make sense, right? It's got to be something that's possible. It's got to be desirable. It's got to be something you need, that you want to achieve. But it's got to be viable. It's got to be possible, and it's got to be able to live. When you look at those things, you get that sweet spot right in the middle of the willow. You hit your ball on that sweet spot, bam, it goes miles, right? No one can catch it. When you have that sweet spot between desirability, viability, and feasibility, you know that you're going to have a good strategy. So, here's how you prepare to do your strategy. We've talked about the space. We've talked about the space and having no distractions, all that sort of thing. You need to gather the right people. Who are the right people? People? Who are the right people?
Right people for right.
Yes, but how do you know? Experience? Teamwork? What else? What else are you looking for? Regional people, yes. Yes.
People with the right talent.
Yes.
Decision makers.
Decision makers, what do you really need those? Yes.
Hardworking.
We hope so.
Yeah.
We hope so. But we need to have people who have knowledge. When I see organizations that do the strategy, they have a chairman of the board and they have chief executive and one other person, and they're not asking the people on the ground who are delivering, they're not asking, what are you seeing? You're not going to have a strategy that delivers. It's like, again, walking in the shoes of your customers, your stakeholders, and staff. You need to bring people from across your organization, different viewpoints. It's fine to bring someone in who's going to mix it up. Diversity in thinking styles, communication styles, diversity in how they understand the world and who they operate with. So you should be having people at all levels of the organization. And if you are a really good communicator, maybe you want to bring in some customers. Or maybe you want to talk to some of your partners and so on. And you need to have a process. What we're doing these next 3 days is showing you the process. There's a process. And the process will become clear. But when you go back, because you've talked about going back and wanting to learn this, write it down, the way it will work for your organization. Because processes are fine, but if you don't write them down, if you don't make them clear to everybody who's involved with them, then they're just a secret in your head. And a process that's a secret is not a process. And you have to do what we call the RASCI. Have you heard this term RASCI before? So RASCI is a really useful tool for any type of planning. Any type of planning. First of all, the R. Who is responsible? Who has to get the job done? Who is responsible for ensuring that this strategy, all the bits and pieces that we pull together, gets written and everything? Who's that person? Who is accountable? Now, people get accountability and responsibility mixed up sometimes. The person who is accountable needs to make sure that it is done. And that is the person, if it's not done, will get into trouble. So you can say, you're responsible, you're going to write the strategy, but you're accountable. And if this person doesn't write the strategy, it's your fault. Okay, so you guys can start working together. Pretty good. The S. Who's supporting? You can't do this alone. You need to be asking questions. There are people doing bits of research, doing bits of writing, coming up with ideas. You have to have supporting people. You have to be able to see who do you consult. You need to consult all types of people. You need to consult your customers, your partners, your stakeholders, your shareholders, your members, whatever. And I. Who is informed? Now maybe you have a board that's slightly, if you have a board, maybe it's a slightly distant board, but they want to know what's going on. They want to know that, yes, you're doing the strategy now. They want to know that it's going to be presented to them. They're going to have an opportunity to have a discussion, or maybe they want to be involved in, I don't know. But you need to know who has to know. And if you have a RASCI, you can do this for virtually any activity and any plan. Because this is what we call role clarity. Knowing what your job is, understanding what your position is doing that, what's expected of you, is a highly motivating thing. So RASCI is important.
I have a question. So, this assigning some honor to the strategy, I think it's about the strategic document when you are developing it. Once
the process.
The process. Once the strategy is developed, it's owned by the whole of organization, right?
So that's a really good point. So the process is like you have an owner who says, like, you say, okay, we're doing the strategy, making you responsible for doing it.
The strategy is not an isolation.
No, it can't be. It cannot be. But let me take you through what I'm just going to say. It is the collective. But someone still has to be the person that synthesizes that collective, that helps it happen, to ensure that the meetings take place, to ensure that there are people who are available to provide this information, to make sure that it's written, to make sure that it's shared and so forth. The strategy itself belongs to everybody. And everybody should be able to look at that strategy and say, I see myself here. I can see where I am in the strategy. You must have that ownership. So the process and the development of the document, that is owned. But the ownership of the strategy is by everyone, but someone's going to be responsible and accountable. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
I feel some contradiction in responsibility and accountability. Don't you think that if someone is responsible and someone else is accountable, so how does it trade off?
So if you think about who's accountable as the person who's a sponsor. So usually the person who's accountable will be the chief executive or a top role like that. But usually the chief executive is the person that writes it. They usually say, okay, I'm going to have this person here who's head of this area or understands this person's going to be writing it. But it's still the chief executive who's the person who has to make sure it gets done. And if the person, does that explain it? Yeah. Okay, it's slightly hierarchical, but also the A clause is stand for approved. So the A can stand for whoever has to approve it. So this person writes it, but you get to approve it. That's the other way you can put it.
What about time period? Should it be time specific or job specific? For how long should we spending? Should it be for a period of time or just for specific jobs?
Okay, do you mean the duration of the strategy? Okay, so generally strategies span between 3 and 5 years. But it does depend on your organization. Some actually have longer term strategies and some have shorter term strategies. It's what feels right and what is appropriate for the environment that you're operating. But 3 to 5 is good. 3 to 5 is good.
Is it different from the strategic plan and strategy?
The strategy is a strategic plan. It's the one and the same. But it's not the operational plan.
Yes.
So an operational plan or an annual plan slices out the strategy year by year.
So here, when we mention strategy, it means strategic plan.
We do, yes. Okay, so strategy, when I talk about strategy, I talk about the strategic plan, your organizational strategy, whatever you want to call it. 3 to 5 years or whatever. Okay, are we all clear?
Most of the organizations are focusing on the 3 to 5 years, but they are also reviewing their strategy.
They have to deliver their strategy annually, which is why you use a strategy to devise your annual operating plan, which on day 3, Andrea is going to take you through. Okay, because you can't have a strategy and not have a way to implement it. Okay, good. We're getting some good questions. Please don't get an external writer, because, you know, and I've been a writer in my past, I've been an editor in my past. They will write what they think you want, but it's not necessarily what you need and what you feel here and in your heart and your soul what matters. So it doesn't matter if it's not perfectly written. What matters is it represents you. Okay, so and if it's not a long document, don't get caught up on it. Honestly, don't. Just make sure it's written down. But do consider, as I said before, having an external facilitator to take you through the process. Someone who can challenge, someone who has absolutely no interest in the outcome, is just there to ask you the hard questions and to make sure you go through the steps in the process. That's a good idea if you can. You don't have to get a professional one, you can just get someone from a partner or something like that who can help you out. Decide who you need to consult. Who matters? Ensure that the client, the member perspective is understood. Really hard to write a strategy, you're delivering services and you don't know what they need or what matters. And if you have a board, they need to be engaged appropriately. Now, governance is an entirely separate thing. It's another course we offer actually. A board has a particular role in strategy. They're generally the ones that approve it. They need to understand it. Some boards are much more engaged with it than others. But they need to know what their role is, and they might decide that for themselves. But they cannot be excluded. Okay, they cannot be excluded.
So
Any questions? Yes.
Here, by appropriately, you mean that we don't have to engage him too much also?
Well, it's up to the board actually. I think the board decides for itself. But however,
Because it will get too
Yes.
long and too
so I think
complex.
this is why you need to be accountable and you need to own it. And you need to invite the board. But when the board writes a strategy, I've seen a disaster. I've seen disasters. They're completely out of their head in a different place. And they're writing, I mean,
Too
so-
abstractly, you know.
my word. I mean, so I can give you 2 examples. One is a organisation in Botswana I was working with, and they got an external writer to do it with the board. And let me tell you about this board, because I don't know what you're like here, but the board had 58 members. Oh la la, right? Can you imagine the strategy? It was absolute. It was a tragedy. It's exactly what it was a tragedy. They've had, by the way, 124 action points for a team of 4 people. It was just awful, and they didn't like it when I told them this is probably not the best way to do your strategy. They didn't like it. And the other one was a really good board in an island in the Caribbean, and they were really, really focused. But they asked the wrong questions to the wrong people. And what they ended up with a strategy, which was, it was an investment organization, but it had them delivering things that they could not deliver on. They were delivering on the investment climate. They were delivering on things that the organization itself had no control over. That's why boards don't write good strategies. Because they all come with their egos and their ideas, and you are the experts of your organizations. The boards should help you.
Penny, can you say what's the best number of board members?
I can, but that's a separate course. How many of you have boards? So if you,
किसी organization की board बनी हुई है।
okay.
मेरे ख्याल में सबके
So how many members are in your boards? Tell me, start with now. 12?
8.
8?
7.
7? 11? 13?
30.
60.
What? Sorry, how many?
60.
Oh, 1/6. I thought you
Yeah.
said 60. Yeah.
Not 60.
Yeah.
12.
Do you know what? You are all in the good ballpark.
Yes.
You're all good. You are all good. So pat yourself on the back. I think depending on the size of the organisation, anything between 7 and 14-ish, that's good. Gets bigger than that, it gets unwieldy. Smaller than that, you just don't have enough for quorum. Okay, but they've got to be the right people. But this is a whole other training, so I won't go there, but I could.
But I wish we could decide our board members.
Also part of the next training, yeah, you want that. I have a lot to say about governance. It's an area that
Depending on the organization, they have the 7, 11, and the 5 different dimensions and the different board.
yeah. Okay, so I'll have a chat to Bilal about whether there should be governance training at some point, huh? I've got a lot to share, but we're not sharing it now. We're going to engage this board, which are all the correct size, by the way, appropriately. You need to engage with them at the outset about how they want to be involved. But they do have to sign off.
But my experience is that the team has to develop the strategy and then only present it to the first draft should be presented to the board rather than engaging them from the outset.
I think it's okay to say, what are you expecting to see? It's okay to say, what would you see as our overarching objective? I think it's okay to ask them some of those high-level questions before. They do not want to see a fait accompli. They don't want to see it finished. They want to feel they sort of see themselves. Okay.
In that case, the strategy could be, okay, here is the first draft. We want your opinion, your feedback. So
it depends on your board. It does depend. I mean, I've been on boards and I've managed boards, and I always find that when we
have a different opinion.
Yes.
Because the board members are not involved in the whole process of the preparation of the strategy. That's why our opinions are very much different, because they were not involved in the whole process.
Yes.
That's why might be their opinion would be not matched with the strategy whatever, because we people as a ground and foreign boards in the field and whatever the respective head of the departments have the mind, and they prepare the strategy. But the board member, they are the association, they what are the issues and what we have. So it is the responsibility of the key person from the organization who may brief the board about the every aspect of the process, whatever he has adopted for the preparation of the strategy.
The board, the board is a C in the eye. They're a consultant and they are informed.
Must be briefed about that.
The board need to understand that it's happening, the time frame, and the points where they can intersect and what they can expect to see at those points. Yes.
But what you're talking, sorry.
The mind, the other side.
Okay, hold on. We go here first. Okay.
But if you talk about the same scenario, it would be a different aspect. What the people would be briefing the board is from their experience and analysis.
The board members, you mean?
They were talking about the board is independent and they do not have an idea, and the people should, brief them about the complete scenario. But when the people start briefing them, they brief the board according to their own experience and their own analysis. While these strategies are made, even the board members, a good strategy would have their board members involved while making these strategies as well.
To a degree, and I think it's how you work with they need to feel like it's theirs too, but they can.
Because they are the people who would be owning it as well.
They are the stewards.
Yep.
They're the stewards.
Right. But the actual people who would be working would be at the grassroots level, but still they have to be involved.
Yes.
Because if I'm going to put you some analysis, it's from my view.
But you're presenting analysis from consultation, because part of the process. So it's not going to be your view. It's going to be a view that's been gained by the process that you've gone through, because it's a process. So the board needs to be engaged. But it needs to be engaged appropriate. When I say appropriate, it's appropriate for your board. But the board must not run it. And they must not write it. Do you understand the difference?
yes.
Okay. We move.
Yeah, I have some more.
So who's talking? Yes.
Well, learning and listening, I've just got some points. I think implementable, flexible, and applicable strategy or a strategic plan shall include all the three layers of the management, the top management, the middle, or the lower management.
Totally, yes.
So then it can be a very effective strategy, I must say. If we just exclude any of the layer from it, from management layer, I think it can just.
Well, we're not excluding. We're just making sure that they're engaged appropriately.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's no exclusion.
As per their roles and their expertise.
Yes. Exactly. Okay. So what are the risks? What are the risks about not doing it properly? Lack of clarity. If you don't understand what you're doing, you haven't got the clarity, it's really hard to do anything at all. Clarity is going to come up time and time again. So it helps you clarify your focus. Know what's what. Again, look, if it has insufficient engagement by the board, then the level of credibility is low. That's why you need to have that engagement appropriately. Because it needs that credibility. The board needs to buy into it, support it. If you haven't got sufficient staff buy-in, if they haven't been engaged throughout, they're not going to buy into it. It's not going to be their strategy. They're not going to be motivated to implement it. If you don't have enough communication with your stakeholders, they have a stake in this too. They need to see how they've been reflected. Sometimes reflection could only be a paragraph or a sentence or acknowledgement. They just need to see it. We talked about this before. The unexpected. Events can change the context. The strategy helps guide you through that, but you are going to have to make adjustments. Lack of skills in development or implementation. You all have the skills. All of you, and I can tell from listening to the questions, you all have the skills to do the strategy. But at the end of the strategy comes the implementation. And there are core things that you need to do to make sure it's implemented. Because all the work in the strategy will mean nothing if you aren't able to put it in place. And if you have a political element to your organisation, and I don't know, some may and some may not, if you don't have that political understanding, that political support, you will struggle. So that's another layer of consultation that you may need to do to familiarise them and make them comfortable. Okay.
Can you explain the second last point?
Lack of skills in development and implementation. So if you aren't able to use the process to create a document, to create a strategy that people can look at and go, gosh, this feels like us, and we believe it's desirable, viable, feasible, then you've failed already. But if you don't go ahead and use the ways to implement, which is about the implementation plan, to include operational or annual plans, communication about it, measurement, change management, all these different types of things, then you won't be able to put it in place. You have to understand what are the things that sort of put the stakes on the ground and say, here's how the strategy is going to go. Okay, that's why it's important. Previous slide, insufficient.
Insufficient engagement by the board.
Yes.
For the successful implementation of strategy, organization must have a board, and the board must be consistent the people who have expertise in their respective field. Because if the organization is working in 4 or 5 sectors, that 5 sectors, that organization must have 5 persons from those 5 sectors, respective sectors who have an expertise in their respective field. Then the strategy will be successful.
I think this strays in the territory of how to construct a board, and which I have lots of advice and lots of opinions and so forth. But I think we don't have the time to go into that detail now. The board needs to be representative of who the community that you're serving. Let me just say that. In practice, I don't see it often enough. Truly, I do not. One more question, then we'll move.
Yeah, basically, I have also some confusion about the two words, assumption and risk.
So what was the first word?
Assumption
And risk?
and risk.
So, later. So risk is the thing that might happen to make the strategy not occur. Okay. Oh, let me just finish. So a risk is what could possibly stop this occurring in the way that you expect it to occur. I was going to say that not all risks are bad. Some risks actually, if you have good mitigations for your risk, can actually be really helpful for you. An assumption is saying, okay, so the strategy will succeed, assuming that the economy stays stable, assuming that these are the factors that we are saying will be in place to ensure. So they're not the same. An assumption is what you believe to be true, and you expect to be true, so the strategy will take place. A risk is what could risk it, what could stop it happening. So again, risk and assumption is not the same, and an issue is not the same as a risk. An issue is a risk that's happened. Okay? Again, a risk training is something we don't have time for in this training, but it goes alongside. In fact, we do risk and governance together at the same time. Usually it's quite helpful, because these things are like, you're interested in these types of things, right? Risk and governance and things. Okay, we have a chat with now.
The risk person, they are focusing always on the assumptions because they have the experience, lot of the mind they people have, and through their experience, they are looking at this kind of might be this would be the risk.
Yeah, there are subtleties in meaning. I think we come to that in another training. Let's move on. One more? Last one.
Yeah.
Promise.
From where we get the clarity, does it come from the vision or mission of company? Because there will
Certainly
be,
does help.
there will be so many people involved, and
Yes.
there will be difference of opinion. So how will we align those difference of opinion to the vision and mission of the company?
So what I say is just hold the question until we move along a little bit further, and I think it might come clear for you. Okay? So just keep it in your mind, and we'll come back to it later.
Okay, I think that.
Okay, so just to quickly move on, we talk about the modern adaptive approach for strategy is flexible. We live in a world that's volatile, don't we? Things are changing all the time, and faster and faster and faster. There's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't, 10 years ago, things seemed pretty like you knew what was going to happen in the next days. These days, honestly, it's really different. It's complex, it's ambiguous. We call this the VUCA world. And it's uncomfortable where we are now. But we need to understand this is our reality now. It's a different reality. Things have changed. So all strategy carries about risk. And let me tell you something, if you're not taking risks, you're not moving ahead. Every step forward is a risk, right? So you need to understand that risk is your friend. It's how you treat it. But you need to identify them, assess them, and treat them. Again, risk management training, separate, otherwise we'll be here for another 3 days, which will be fun, but no. Strategy development needs to be emergent, things that come up, brainstorm, divergent, think differently, then convergent, bringing all the thinking together. Adaptive and iterative. In a VUCA world, you have to keep changing. The strategy that you start out with is not going to be the strategy you end up at the end of the process. It will not be. And if it is, then you haven't done the process actually. Because it's fed from all levels of the organization and it's owned by everyone. So you see how your questions, they're all answered. So you show that you're asking the right questions, people. It's developed using creativity and empathy, and not pages and pages and pages of over-analysis of theory. It's just not worth it. And designed by those closest to the customers, because you are your experts. You're the experts. Your teams are the experts. So believe that you can do it. You should. Okay, so this is the process. Here's what we call the strategy on a page. That's what we're going to get to. What is the process? You understand the context. You do the strategic thinking, the emergent, the divergent. You do the planning, the convergent. You do the iterative. As you learn more, you adjust and change. Okay? So here's the process. You have a core purpose. In fact, Andrea, do you want to do this one? Sorry? You want to do this one while I get it?
Sure, sure. Okay. So as Penny says, we actually have to go through a process. We start with the context. And what we're going to see is that we're going to have several tools that will help us understanding both, let's say, internally and externally, what are we dealing with, right? We all know that the strategy is a strategy, is an approach to solve some issues that our beneficiaries are facing in a certain context. So what we call emerging thinking is what we see in the context. We need to understand the context. So for that, we go through different let's say, strategy. Then the core purpose. What is the core purpose of the organization and how you define it? We will see that we will going to discuss the high-level strategic goals. Every organization actually is contributed to something higher than its own mission and mandate, right? So you all contribute to, for example, improving agricultural development in your own region, or you work in developing companies and bringing them to life, etc. But you all contribute to a higher core purpose. In order to do that, you need to understand, and we have already discussed that your let's say core purpose needs to focus on something specific. In a world of scarce resources, we cannot go ahead and just do everything and anything, right? We need to focus. So the process is where to play and how to win will help us identify what are the target clients, how we do identify in which segments of clients are we working. Are we going to work in the company all in the same way? Are we going to tackle all the same markets all in the same way? The answer is probably not. And if the answer is yes to that, you're probably going to spread thin your resources and have a very little impact on what you're doing. So this is where to play and how to win, which help us also translating that into targets, specific targets that we want to achieve. Then we're going to go back to convergent thinking. You see that we have emerging thinking is when all the ideas are worth discussing, all the ideas are bringing something to the table, but then there is a moment where we need to go and let's say get them really to squeeze what is the essence of what we need to do and go into a convergent thinking. The convergent thinking will happen on several levels. You have to decide what are your strategic objectives, your pillars, what are your core, let's say, element that you're going to discuss and you're going to actually put in action so that they become your actual, the pillars that will, let's say, support your vision and mission. What will help you achieving those objectives? And this is where you decide what your key performance indicators are. First of all, you define the targets in emergent thinking. Okay? Who are the actual beneficiaries that I'm going to support? And then when you go and to narrow down to your strategic objectives, and we're going to do that, don't worry, this is just an overall view. You're going to define how I'm going to measure whether or not those targets are actually achieved. Then you're going to have to look at also what are your strategic actions that you put. So basically is translating your strategic objective into an operational plan and to make it actionable. Because sometimes, most of the time, strategic objectives are really, let's say, they will tackle a main area of activity of your organization. So if an organization provides policy support, this is probably one of the areas. If you do advocacy for your beneficiaries, this would be also another area. I know there are several chambers, so you know what I'm talking about, right? And after that, we will go down to the internal pillars. Everything that you want to make happen as an organization, and every strategic pillar that you decide to implement will need the core conditions, the core blocks of your organization to be in place. And this comes down to people, resources, technology, and networks. Okay? you cannot act, you cannot bring those elements to reality if you don't have those elements in place. And we are going to discuss that. And we're going to see whether each of you is going to develop this structure. And it's going to be very interesting at the end of this 3-day training, where all of you will walk away with these elements written down on a paper. So,
thanks, Andreas. So, thank you.
Sure.
You're so much better than I am. Okay, so now we have the cards that you've been eyeing up on your table, and you have a list. So what I want you to do is that the cards explain what each of these factors are on the list. But I've just spent the morning messing them up. If they were in the right order, and now they're not. So I want you to work, either you work them in threes or twos, however you want to do it, but I want you put these in the order that you think they need to happen to have a strategy. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes. So you're going to work as a team, maybe you can do it quickly, and start getting them into the right order, and then putting the order onto the sheet that I've given you. Okay.
Is it clear, the exercise?
It's translated. Okay, so we look at the cards.
आपने कार्ड्स देखें
Okay, and there's a list.
और उसमें एक लिस्ट दी गई है.
You look as groups or twos or threes. You read the cards.
2 या 3 के ग्रुप में कार्ड्स को पढ़ लें.
And then you decide what order they should happen in.
और फिर आप फैसला करें कि वो किस ऑर्डर में, किस तरतीब में होने चाहिए.
You know, you need to look at them and then decide what
आपने
order.
आपने डिसाइड करना है कि ये किस तरतीब में होने चाहिए.
Okay, and then you use the list to mark whether they're 1, 2, 3, 4.
फिर आपने उस तरतीब को ना 1, 2, 3, 4 से लिखना है.
There are some things at the back of every.
Things at the back are only things to demonstrate. Just for clarification.
पीछे जो दिए गए हैं वो एग्जांपल हैं, मिसालें हैं कार्ड के पीछे जो.
And
और
if you're very good,
अगर आप बहुत अच्छे हैं
you'll be able to take the cards away with you.
तो आप कार्ड अपने साथ ले जा सकते हैं.
And they're all different orders.
अच्छा, अभी ये मुख्तलिफ तरतीब में है, तो आपको उनको ऑर्डर तरतीब से
Yes. Yeah.
फिर आखिर में इस शीट पे आपने वो नंबर लिखने हैं, तरतीब है. आपने कौन सा एक नंबर पे लाना है, कौन सा दूसरे तीसरे नंबर पे, इस पेज पे आखिर में आपने डालना है. एक टेबल का एक बनेगा, ठीक है. One table will have one list with proper order, ठीक है.
मेरे हिसाब से पहले